So thank you so much for coming out on a kind of gloomy evening. So as Nicolette said, what we thought that I would do is read a little bit. I'm actually going to hold off on the video for a bit. I'm going to read a little bit from the book, and then I'm going to read some more from the book. Oh, my voice just got louder. I'm going to read some more from the book, and I'm going to show a little bit of video without sound, just so that you get a sense of what that's about. And as she said over there on the table, there are 9. So the first thing I'm going to read from the book is actually the dedication page, because the dedication page, well, it's actually it's an epigraph from my former and dearly missed colleague Jose Esteban Munoz from Cruising Utopia. And I just read this because it's great, and everybody should read this and say it all the time. And I used to give it to my students and tell them to graffiti it in public bathrooms, and I encourage you to do the same if you get the book. This is a good use for it. Some will say that all we have are the pleasures of the moment, but we must never settle for that minimal transport. We must dream and enact new and better pleasures, other ways of being in the world, and ultimately new worlds. So when we made the galleys for the book, there was that page that had the epigraph. And over here on the page that nobody ever reads, which has the publication information, they had a little note that said, "The 9 dances referenced in the text, signaled by still images and semi-fictitiously credited to the narrator, can be found at," and then there's the website, that's a Vimeo website, with the password Poussin. And I'd love to talk to you about why the password is Poussin. But, so when I saw it in the galleys, I said, nobody's going to read that. Let's move it right below this beautiful, amazing quote by Jose, and everybody will read it. It's right under that quote. It appears that it still has kind of, for some reason, not been something that people have picked up on. I think, a lot of people have contacted me after the book and talked to me about the writing of the book, and nobody mentions the videos, and the reviews don't mention the videos. And the review mentioned the videos, but said, interestingly enough, there are these still pictures from these videos in the book, but obviously we're not allowed to see the real videos because you only have the still from the video. And I was kind of touched by that, because I kind of like the idea of a piece of art that I might have made that nobody has access to, and that's related to some of the things that happen in the novel. And I always, the fiction that I've written previously has also had performance components that are online. And with those books as well, people don't seem to look at those. I think part of it might just be that people turn to fiction because they want to read and they don't want to confuse their categories. I love to confuse categories, but I'm also perfectly happy if people just read it as a book, read the book without looking at the video. So or if someone were to watch the videos and never read the book, I would also feel happy that they had looked at the videos. But tonight, I thought I would use this opportunity, because when I was first contacted by Nicolette's predecessor, Rosie Clark, she said, we like to do interactive things sometimes, some things that blur boundaries between genres. So that's what I thought I'd do. So the book, it's not just that it has these performances that are adjunct to the text. It's also partly about that, because it's about collaboration. And it's about collaboration that was initiated on the internet, and that's why the collaborative performances are housed there on that Vimeo page. But I brought these iPads so that you'll be able to, if you're interested, to look at them. So, as I said, I'm going to read from the text. I'm eventually going to start showing you some of the images without sound, but then later, if you would care to, they're very intimate. Intimacy is sort of a theme in the novel, so I think I like for people to encounter them like with headphones in a kind of intimate way. So that's why I brought those, as opposed to just having this. So I'm going to begin by reading a passage that is about spoken language and the voice, because there are 2 collaborative relationships in the text. One is with a musician who lives in, well, you'll hear all about this musician, who lives in Germany. And and the other is with a conceptual artist who's based here in New York. And these two semi-fictional relationships and collaborations that are written into the book are based on real collaborations that I had over time. So the person, Sami, the musician, is somebody that I encountered, or the narrator, Barbara Anderson, encountered Sami on the internet, hearing his music. And eventually they begin to correspond, and the correspondence leads to an artistic collaboration. So I'm going to begin by just telling you a little bit about how that correspondence developed. At first it was all written, and then eventually the character of Sami announces that he likes to write, that's an interesting term. He likes to make long voice messages and send them to his friends. And the narrator says that she would be happy to receive these voice messages. So Sami sent me the first voice message in July of 2012, after we'd been corresponding for a little over a month. As I said, he'd mentioned that he sometimes liked to do this with other friends, but it was the first time he sent me a recording of his spoken voice, it was prompted by a conversation we'd been having about accents and about some peculiarities in his written English. From the bits of it I've reproduced, you will have noticed that he didn't appear to be a native speaker of English, as it was, and yet almost all of the text on his website was in English, as was most of the music he sang. He was living in Germany, but never sang in German. He'd recorded a few songs in French and a couple in Spanish, all without any discernible accent, as far as I could tell. I mentioned something about how much I loved Aguas de Março, and almost immediately he posted a gorgeous version on the Jazzman set list. I wasn't sure what was more mind-boggling, his spontaneous rendering of the complex chords and syncopations of the guitar, or his nearly perfect, relaxed pronunciation of the Portuguese. The song has one of the longest and most intricate lyrics in the history of popular song. I asked him how he did that. He said he liked trying to master accents and fake his way through languages he didn't really understand. And that was when I got the voice message. It was about 20 minutes long. Most of his voice messages are about that long. It was riveting, not so much because of what he was saying, but because of his voice and his breath and the sighs and the hemming and hawing that came between the words. His speaking voice, like his singing voice, was deep and very, this is really the only word for it, musical. His accent was, roughly, British, and his spoken English made it seem more his language than you would have guessed from his writing. By then he told me a bit about his upbringing. He was born in Delhi to a Pashtun Indian father and a German mother. They were both classically trained musicians. And during his childhood, they moved to London, where he lived until he was a teenager, and his parents' marriage collapsed. The move to Europe was partly provoked by anti-Islamic sentiment in India after the assassination. Sorry, that went down the wrong. There's a saying for that. My partner always tells me there's a saying that's went down the gypsy pipe. The move to Europe was partly provoked by anti-Islamic sentiment in India after the assassination of Indira Gandhi. Sami's family wasn't directly threatened. Most of the violence was directed against Sikhs, but it wasn't a good time. He said in London they lived in Brent with the other curry munchers, and South Asians called him Gora, white, and the whites called him Paki. When Sami was 14, his father left them, and his mother took Sami to Cologne, where her family lived. He went to high school there, and that's where he met his best friend, Farouk. They played in a rock band together. By his own admission, Sami was a handful in adolescence, a combination of innate sensitivity and hormones. I failed to mention, it's very significant. Early on in the correspondence, the character of Sami explains that he has a form of autism. He's on the autism spectrum, form that in German is called Inselbegabung, which is what we call in English usually savant syndrome. So it means he has some social phobia and some other particular sensitivities. It's a neurological condition that he explains. When his mother kicked him out of the house in exasperation, he went to live for a time with Farouk's family. He was also very close to Farouk's sister, Minou. She was now a photographer, and she was the one who took many of those portraits of Sami that appeared on his website. He said he was often uncomfortable being looked at, but with Minou, it was okay. Her photographs were very beautiful. Once in a while, he'd even look at the camera. In those shots, it was Sami's eyes that appeared to convey too much information. He was handsome, but his eyes were unsettling. When I told him that, he said everyone said that, and he joked about being a basilisk. But back to that question of language. Sami said that after having lived in Germany now for 20 years, surely Germany was his best language, but he'd retained something of a British accent when speaking it. He liked it for speaking and thinking, but not for singing. He seemed a little embarrassed when I mentioned some of the syntactical quirks in his written English, mostly in his constructions of the future tense. In the voice recording, he said it made sense that he would make errors in the future tense because the future was the most difficult thing for him to imagine. He hardly ever made plans more than a month or two out. This was particularly frustrating to his ex-wife, who often wanted to make arrangements for his meetings with his son. He said he found it difficult to imagine anything too far in the future, and in truth, he'd always imagined he wouldn't live very long. He didn't say this in a particularly dramatic way. He actually sounded kind of cheerful about it. So in his early childhood, he'd been exposed to several languages, and it seemed none really felt to him like a mother tongue. But all of this is perhaps somewhat beside the point, since in fact words, any words at all, weren't Sami's first language. He didn't speak for the first 4 years of his life, until his parents put him in front of a piano, and he began to play. And everyone was astonished. And then he began to speak a little. Sami's diagnosis didn't come for some time. His early childhood was tumultuous, as you can imagine. His father's family was large, and in his words, there were always relatives around trying to hug and kiss him or else hit him in order to reach him, in order to teach him to respect his father or uncle or aunt or cousin or uncle's cousin or the neighbor who was married to his cousin's cousin. For Sami, the hugs and kisses were as terrifying as the hitting. He described the little girls at the school playground. They also wanted to hug him, and he'd scream and throw a fit. He sent me a photo in which he must have been about 6 or 7, shortly before his family left Delhi. A group of brown-faced little children stood in plaid uniforms, the girls in skirts and white blouses, the boys in shorts showing their scraped little knees. The other children's expressions ranged from radiant to quizzical. Just one beautiful, delicate boy averted his gaze entirely from the camera. Sami looked like somebody had rubbed chalk on his face. He looked terrified. I also had the impulse to hug him, even though I knew it would make him scream. So in that first message, he spoke a little about what he liked and didn't like about German, what languages he liked to sing in and why, and he laughed a little and sighed and said, and ah, and That's what we a phatic language, words and sounds that don't really convey any information, but just serve to maintain a sense of contact in a conversation. I wrote him about phatic language after that, and it became a kind of running joke between us because some of his voice messages seemed to be about 80% phatic. The interesting thing about this message was that the topic of it was the same as the substance, his speaking voice. When he'd finished, he signed off almost as though he were signing a letter. He said, "All right then, goodbye, and have a nice day. Sami." There was a pause, and then he said, "P.S. Well, the only thing I'm faking when I'm talking is the modulation of my voice. I didn't always do this, but I learned it, and somehow I mastered it in order to sound a little more human. Because people just modulate their voices when they're talking, and I learned that. So yeah, well, that's the only thing I'm faking, just in order to sound less like an alien. Okay, then, well, cheers, goodbye." There was a little break in the recording, and then he added a PPS. "Well, I just listened to this, and I'm sorry my breathing sounds like it was, and he laughed, like Darth Vader or something. And he laughed again. It's not always like that, I promise. Because he speaks German, Sami sometimes pronounces the letter V like a W and the letter W like a V. I thought that was funny, Darth Vader. He didn't sound like Darth Vader, though it's true that his breathing was audible. It was like that recording of João Gilberto singing Estate, where you could hear the spit on his lips and the hairs in his nose. I liked it. So that describes a little bit how those voice messages began. And now I'm going to skip ahead to something about one of the first dances that I sent to him. Yvonne, oh, now I'm going to turn this on. I think if I just go like this, yes. So I just let that run. Yvonne Rainer made Hand Movie in 1966 when she was hospitalized after a surgery. It was about all the dancing she could do. Later on, for a time, she would completely give up choreography for experimental film. Ty had said, of course, we all know Yvonne's hands well, but actually, I only watched Hand Movie recently. It kind of shocked me when I saw it because I'd been making hand dances myself. Mine don't really resemble Yvonne Rainer's. Hers has a tone similar to that of Trio A. This has obviously moved on from the hand dances, but I'll get there. Hers has a tone similar to that of Trio A. The affect is very flat. It's silent, and while the movement is challenging, there's nothing graceful about it. She has an impressive ability to move her fingers independently, but it's the kind of thing that makes you think she'd be good at thumb wrestling or card tricks, not dancing. My hand dances are a little more intentionally beautiful. I made the first one just shortly after I sent Sami the song with the breath in it. I'd promised to make a dance to the Paganini, a real dance with a real choreography, but I didn't feel I was quite ready to do it. For all that I could rationalize to myself an aesthetic of amateurism, I thought that particular musical performance called for a certain degree of preparation. I knew I was going to need to work on it. I wasn't sure exactly what that would entail. But I wanted to make him something, so I made a hand dance. I just filmed it on my computer in my bedroom, my two hands against the dark red wall. It was very short and there was no music. My hands looked like birds or lovers. Often when I wake up, I do a little dance like that with my hands. I watch them in the full-length mirror on my door, which faces my bed. After that embarrassing exchange in which I imagined something sexual, that is to say, in the correspondence, there's a moment when the narrator imagines something erotic with Sami, with the character. And he at first freaks out and then gets used to the idea. After that embarrassing exchange in which I imagined something sexual and he was mildly freaked out, Sami had come around and told me that it had been a little confusing to him at first because my book had made him start to imagine things, but he wasn't sure he wanted to. He'd had a lover for a little less than a year, a woman with 2 daughters who told him that she'd like to have another child with him. Her name was Sabine. She lived in Berlin. Sami had been commuting there to work as a studio musician when he was well enough. He met her and they got involved, and soon they started talking about her moving to Cologne with the children. He liked the idea of it, but was worried because he often needed to be alone, and he knew from experience it was difficult to live with him. He'd met his ex-wife, Juliane, when they were both still studying. She fell in love with him watching him play music. She was very beautiful, and he couldn't believe she wanted him. They made love all the time. She got pregnant, and then they quickly decided to marry. Her parents weren't particularly happy about it, though they adored Kake. He told me he laughed inappropriately out of nervousness during the wedding ceremony. Things went downhill pretty fast. She was a dentist now, and she lived with somebody else. And Sami mostly exasperated her. Kake would come regularly for visits and for piano lessons with Sami. Sabine visited Sami with her daughters sometimes, and Kake liked her, and he liked playing big brother to the little girls, but Sami was pretty sure things wouldn't work out, and they didn't. Anyway, when we started writing, it was around the time when Sabine was starting to get fed up. I think he told her about our correspondence. She also saw the jazz suite, and that didn't go over too well, but there were plenty of problems already, beyond even Sami's difficulties with contact and intimacy. She didn't like Cologne, and she wanted to be close to her family. Also, she was intimidated by Sami's talent. Even though she was far better equipped than him for everyday life, she wasn't an artist and felt intellectually inadequate around him. Sami tested very highly in school, and he's extremely well-read. He's fluent in several languages, though he doesn't really sound like a native speaker in any of them. He knows a lot about art history and has an encyclopedic knowledge of various musical traditions. He showed me Sabine's picture. She's very pretty. He called her my Nordic princess. In the picture, she wore no makeup. She just had a slight frown, and she looked at the camera as though she were confronting a challenge. I asked Sami if he'd taken that picture, and he said yes. Her daughters were in the picture as well, little tow-headed angels. The 4-year-old looked down shyly, and the 2-year-old smiled gleefully. Sami said that each of them was very much as she appeared in that photo. Those were their personalities. He said, "I'm not sure if it's weird I'm showing you this. I thought it was important." I can't imagine what Sabine was thinking when she came up with that idea to have another baby with him. I mean, I can see the appeal, but it didn't seem like a very pragmatic idea. Anyway, when it really fell apart, Sami wrote me about it, and he sent that picture. He was sad, but he knew somehow this was for the best. She'd met somebody else, and she had a new plan, though she said she'd miss him. A little while after that, he told me if I wanted to imagine something, it was all right. He'd imagine something. That message was actually very beautiful. He sent it on August 29th, 2012. In some ways, it was shy. Maybe the word is circumspect. But in parts, it was very lyrical. He divided the message into sections, and he gave them musical names. Scherzo amoroso, a sort of jokey apology for his shyness. Allegro più amoroso. Here he confessed to imagining something. Interlude, adagio con dolore, and in quotations, you have to know that one of my earliest experiences was to be rejected, punished, and left alone for what I am. And vivace giocoso. Right now, he felt happy. His message was somewhat discreet. I'm being even more discreet. But it probably won't surprise you that my response was very affable. I wrote some things. I sent him that hand dance, the short lyrical one where my hands looked like lovebirds. And then a little later, I sent him another hand dance that I really can't show you. So there are, I said there are, that I kind of like the idea of some videos existing or some art existing that the reader can't see. And in fact, there are some videos that the reader can't see. So that's Now I'm going to skip to a section where I talk about dance. Well, I already mentioned that after the embarrassing glitch regarding my imaginative capacity, and after Sami pulled back and then slowly returned, after he sent me the remarkable suite of piano pieces, and after he admitted to imagining something as well, I made him a hand dance. Not the one like Lovebirds, the other one, the one I can't show you. And amazingly, it didn't freak him out. There was no sound on that one either, or there was, but only breath. 3 crescendos and a decrescendo. He answered with a voice message. It was very tender and a little shy. I listened to it twice. He was trying to figure out how to respond. He didn't know what to say, but he didn't sound shocked or embarrassed even. I think he understood it as I meant it, as a dance. When he tried to say how it made him feel, he faltered a little. It was, like many of his messages, mostly phatic. He said, and he inhaled and sighed. There was a pause, and then he laughed and said, I'm not good at this. That recording was so charming. The tone, the hesitation, the breath, the laugh, and ironically, the most beautiful moment was the one when he said he wasn't good at this. That was when I realized that the voice recordings were music, and I decided to make a dance. This was the first of the dances to words, the red one. So that was the second video that you saw after the hand dance. That was that gesturing. So later on, if you want to actually see it with the music of his voice. You can see that, hear it. Oh, this is another hand dance. I'll just let them keep playing because they're in each section. I said I was going to tell you what poussin, why the code word was poussin. Before I started writing the whole novel, I always have to begin with a constraint. And before I knew anything else, I knew, someone said, what's your next novel going to be about? And I said, Poussin. Poussin, if you're like interested in art history and his paintings, they almost always have a triangle, and there's intense dark red, intense gold, and intense blue. And everything is somehow organized around those colors. So I knew from the very beginning that the novel somehow was going to have this, it was going to have 3 colors. So there are 3 colors, and there are 3 sections of the book. And in each section of the book, there's one dance. So there's a red section. In each section, there's a dance, a hand dance, then a dance to the words, and then a dance to music. So you saw the full, now you're seeing, this is dance to words in the blue section. So I'm just letting them play. But what did I want to say about the red one? Okay, so you saw that first, the hand dance to red. So the dance, that long dance that you saw where I had to go through several outfits, it's because I kept trying and trying and trying and trying, and now I'm going to read what that dance was about. And it's the last thing that I'll read. And it describes the first of the dances to music. It was around this time, so the conceptual artist that I reference in the book also began as a ballet dancer, so it was, and then moved to making sculptural work and other forms of conceptual art. It was around this time that I contacted Ty, that's his name, to ask him if he might consider giving me a couple of ballet lessons. I had this idea about the Paganini on the ukulele. That is, Sami had recorded this amazing Paganini on the ukulele, and I wanted to make a dance to it. You may have forgotten that I promised Sami I was going to make a dance to it. Sami himself hadn't exactly been asking for it, but I hadn't forgotten. I knew I wanted to practice something in preparation. I'd looked at a few YouTube videos of some ballet techniques, and it seemed to me that maybe what I wanted to work on were my petits battements. There was a great little video of Romani Pajdak doing these on point. Pajdak is a principal dancer with the Royal Ballet. In the video, you just see her legs. The most popular comment on the comment notes that she has really nice arches. I knew I wasn't going to get up on point, but I thought maybe Ty could get me a little more up to speed. I told him we could do it at my house and he could name his price. He said he'd be glad to give me lessons, though he didn't tell me what he'd charge. He was a little busy for the next few weeks. He was working on a new project, and he'd recently started working at a restaurant, but we agreed to check in later to schedule something. In the meantime, I thought I'd work on another dance to music. I wanted to think a little bit about what it might mean to practice. I was also thinking about that essay by Lauren Berlant and what she'd said about love being an aspiration to be in sync, even if only for a moment. I had a practice tape of Thelonious Monk learning the beautiful old Tommy Dorsey tune, I'm Getting Sentimental Over You. A former colleague who wrote about jazz had given me this recording years before, and ever since it had been something of an obsession. Actually, he gave it to me for Leon. That's the narrator's son. It was during a period when Leon was learning to play some Monk compositions on the piano. My colleague thought he might want to hear what it was like when Monk himself was learning a tune. The recording is really extraordinary. There's several takes, each increasing in mastery and also in length. But to me, the most extraordinary take is the very first one. Monk's wife was apparently recording this on an old reel-to-reel recorder at their house. The first take cuts in halfway through the tune, and Monk doesn't even know at first that the machine is on. At the end of it, you can hear him telling his wife, "Okay, go ahead," and she tells him she's already recording. Basically, that first take is just him figuring out one stumbling little run. It's full of hesitations, like he's trying to decide if this is really what he wants to do. He does it over and over. It's so awkward you can't believe it. But it's the awkwardness of concentration. By the time Monk gets to the last take, he's all over that piece. He's like a kid in a candy shop. That take is almost half an hour long, and he's having a ball. But I love the first one. I love hearing him think about the song and what he wanted to do with it. I wondered if I could dance in sync with that. I wanted to let Sami know that despite my technical weaknesses, I understood what it meant to practice and really learn a piece. I tried it a lot of times. I made some mistakes, but there were moments when I managed to be in sync, if only for a moment. Yeah, this is the Gold Dance to Words. But since they're all over on the table, I was going to say, okay, well, this is the very last dance. So this was the dance that the novel was really leading up to. And it was the dance, it was going to be the dance to Paganini. But if you actually access it, you'll see something else happened. So if you're interested, we had thought, I talked with Nicolette and we had said, should we have question and answer and then have people look at the videos, or I don't know, it's a little, like I don't want to hold you hostage and I'm not sure if people actually want to go and have like an intimate experience with the videos. It might be, what do you think? I'm looking at Nicolette. Yeah, if it might make more sense if anybody wants to ask anything, and then maybe you could look at the videos, and then we could be more festive and casual after that. Yeah, that might make more sense than having you go over there and then come back. And did anybody want to? Yeah.
So you mentioned that at the beginning when you started to think about writing this novel. It started with Busan, as you said. Like Busan, which is a city in South Korea, or what's Busan?
Nicolas Poussin, a French painter. So like a 17th century French paint. I'm not sure about that century. I might be off. It's like they're really old French paintings, and they're really incredibly beautiful. But they're formally very. Very specific. The organization is, there's always a triangular formation, and always there are these three intense colors. And sometimes you get distracted and you don't notice that, but it's pretty marked. And I just love that he just kept doing that over and over, and that he was so committed to, they're basically primary colors, although the gold it's more gold than what we would call yellow, but yeah.
So the second question is, why did you choose Sami as the main character in this novel, and what's the symbolism behind bringing a Muslim person in this novel as the main character?
I didn't choose that. It's the novel is based on real people, so this is a person who came into my life, and so obviously there are all kinds of fraught and intense things about talking about Muslim identity at this particular historical moment, and there were then too. So as I mentioned in the novel, the narrative describes events that happened basically in 2012 and 2013. And there are other things that were happening politically that were, obviously we're in a really intense political moment right now, but it was pretty, there were other things even in 2012 and 2013 that which were like amazingly hopeful and seemed like maybe something great was going to happen, and then other things that were very, very disappointing. So the historical situation of the narrative was something I kind of struggled with, because I wrote it and then I put it away for a time, and when I brought it back out and revised it and thought of publishing it, so many things had changed, and I thought, will people even, what will it mean to talk about the Occupy movement, now? But then kind of interestingly, in some ways I think it's kind of important to remember that moment, and to remember Arab Spring and what we thought might happen, and then what didn't happen, or what happened instead, and yeah, so, but it wasn't a choice that I made. People talk about this book because they kind of put it in the category of what people sometimes refer to as autofiction. In other words, and the narrator is quite explicit about the ways in which her life is very similar to the author's life. So that character and the other character are both, I changed the names for privacy reasons, but all other characteristics were, and if you listen to the voice, you'll hear the voice of a person that I received as voicemails in my email. So, yeah, and that person told this story that is the story that I told about that person. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked the blurring of the fiction and the nonfiction, and I wondered did you try to write it as more conventionally one or the other, or did
I've been experimenting with this for a while. So my first novel was kind of also something that might be construed as autofiction, and I changed it was a first-person narrator, and in many, many ways she resembled me, and so I experimented with that in my first novel. I did it differently structurally. I'm always playing with structures, and so in that one there was almost like a sestina-like structure. It was super complicated, the sort of writing constraints that I gave myself, and the character of the lover kept shifting, so there were 4 different manifestations of one person. So they were all fictionalized, but you couldn't tell, like which one. If you put them in a blender, they were the real lover. If you put those 4 people in a blender, you would get the real lover of the narrator, if you know what I mean. And then the second novel that I published had a first-person narrator that was quite different from me, but was kind of living my life. So it was a male narrator, and he was living in my apartment, eating my food, looking out my window, seeing the things that I see. And so I kind of wanted to see what that would be like for me. I didn't want to go to a third-person narrator yet. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure out when and how that might happen. But this one, I really wanted to go really close, like really. So Barbara Anderson, and people keep calling the narrator Barbara, and her son's name is Leon. My son's name is Leo. Her sister's name is Carolyn. My sister's name is Carol. It's like this close, and every time that the narrator says, and the narrator always will tell you. This really happened. You read it, so okay. So this really happened. If it really happened, it really, really, really happened. And one of the sort of experiences that I had with writing this, and one of the reasons I had to put it away for a long time, was that I'm kind of like I don't think everybody has to be. Obviously, I have no problem with nakedness. I don't think, but I have no problem with people not bearing themselves, and it's not anything, and I don't have any problem with people when they write fiction based on real life with really blurring that and not coming out and saying this is what's real and this is what's not. But me personally, it's just like a sort of George Washington and the cherry tree kind of thing. I'm just compulsively honest, and it's not that I think that's great. It's just I'm just kind of compulsive about saying, look, here's my flaws, or here's my truth. So the traumatic thing that happened was, and this continues to happen even with people that I'm close to, that novel raised for some people that I love very much a kind of like, is it true, or is she making this up? There's a character in the novel who's like a good friend who says, I think maybe you're making this up and you're telling me, Barbara Browning, my good friend, Barbara Browning, you're telling me that this is going on in your life because it's useful for your fiction. And that was really painful for me, like having people not, if I was going to come out and say, this is fiction, this is nonfiction, this part, I changed the names, this part really happened. It was very hard for me not to be believed. And that's also probably, I'm not saying that that's a good characteristic. Like, I don't think that George Washington thing is great. It just happens that it made me feel really anxious. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I have a question about the title. I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
But I think I read that the Lewis Hyde book comes into it
It does. Have you read The Lewis Hyde?
I love that.
Yeah. A lot of people love that book. I love it too. I teach it. I'm going to make you read it. You too.
I
Yeah.
work at a bookstore.
Uh-huh.
I manage a bookstore in Connecticut.
Oh, cool.
And for me, that's like the most important.
You always point people there, and
And because it's the book I think about the most.
But you know what's so funny about that book in bookstores? This just makes me think, because when I went to buy a copy of it at the Strand, and I was like, where would it be in philosophy? But you know where I found it? In the how to write section, like next to books like How to Get a Literary Agent, or How to Structure Your Novel, and Lewis Hyde, and I was like, whoa, that's weird. But so it's not the gift. The title is actually, yes, that book was important to me, but what was important to him and the place that he took the title is from Marcel Maus's great essay, The Gift. And the subtitle of my book is Or Techniques of the Body. And Techniques of the Body is another essay, a really important, gorgeous, amazing text by Marcel Mauss. So Mauss, for me, Marcel Mauss is really at the heart of the thing, but definitely Lewis Hyde was important to me. So Lewis Hyde's thing, if you haven't read Lewis Hyde, is that it basically no writer is just writing out of their own personal stock of genius and all of that. It's all comes into you and then goes out of you. So basically, if you've been reading Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, and they have filled you with their gift, then it's like a gift economy. It comes into you, and then you give that, and that's sort of how creativity works. I mean, that's really super reductive because he talks about a lot of other things, but it's kind of a beautiful way to think about the process. And so obviously that has something to do with my commitment to collaboration and what I get out of that as a part of my writerly process. Yeah. So and it's also so it's also about those books, and it was kind of a joke for me to call it The Gift, because I shouldn't even say this to a bookseller, because nobody should go on Amazon.com, but if you do, and you type in The Gift in the book section, there's like 5,000 books called The Gift. It's the most overused title ever. Some of them are about like gift wrapping, or like how to, some of them are how-to books or whatever, but it's the most, but I like that. I like the fact that it was just endlessly regifted. But I'm mostly talking about Marcel Mauss. But yeah, Lewis Hyde is super important for me too.
And then also, how did you hook up with
Emily
Emily Books?
Books, they're just so great. So yeah, so if you guys don't know about Emily Books, that's the imprint with Coffee House that published this book, but they had distributed my first 2 novels. And that's how I got to know them. So Emily, I don't know how they found them, because those were also with teeny tiny, with an even smaller press than Coffee House. And I don't know how they found them, but then they distributed them, and then Emily got in touch with me, and I call both of them my fairy goddaughters, because they're significantly younger than me, but they have like made my dreams come true in many ways. They're super great, and they. For those of you who don't know, just because it's so great what they say on the backs of their books. Emily Books is a publishing project that champions transgressive, genre-blurring writing by, in parentheses, mostly women. Its founders are Ruth Curry and Emily Gould, and they're great. What's the name of your bookstore, and what town is it in?
Mystic, Connecticut.
Oh, cool.
It's across the street from Mystic Pizza.
Pizza, I was gonna say, that's famous.
Called Bank Square Books.
Yeah.
It's
And
really good.
and you're doing okay?
We're doing great.
That's so great.
Because we're like a tourist town. Like we have people.
Yeah.
And then we get people from everywhere.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Well,
That's why I have all the luggage.
yeah, no, little small bookstores, independent bookstores, we just, you gotta
I
love
used to be
them.
an intern.
Oh, really? Wow, cool.
But I always check with the summers too.
Yeah. No, usually so sometimes I teach a course called Performing Fiction, and so it's a lot of novels, and I have in terms of telling people where to get the books, I say, if you can afford it, go to an independent bookstore and buy it new. If you can't afford that, then go to a used bookstore, and then it goes down to until, and if you really I'll give you the PDF. It gets to that, but yeah.
It's an interesting. But I just saw in the little
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Good people, good people.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I have no idea what time it is, and I don't know if it's, you know, I don't.
5 to 8.
Yeah, so I don't know if you feel like looking at the. I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear the voice if you're. I mean, I don't. And if you're interested in that kind of thing. But anyway, as I said, the book. One of the other themes of the book is what I call inappropriate intimacy, and to see them on those small, screens with the earphones is inappropriately intimate, especially if you look at the ones to words. But I encourage it. So, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.